Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Breakthrough Bestie podcast. I am your host, Angela Brock, and I am a money strategist for women who are ready to take control of their finances and build real wealth. This is the third video in the series on money identity and decision fatigue. So if you have not seen the other videos, I encourage you to go back and watch them because today we are going to be talking about something that most responsible women experience but rarely name, and that is decision fatigue. Not confusion. There's not a lack of discipline. They're pretty clear about those and they're able to name them, but it's fatigue. And it's the kind of fatigue that makes even simple decisions feel heavier than they should. And it makes you delay things, not because you don't necessarily know what to do, but because you're mentally tired of being the one who has to decide. And what happens over time is that fatigue starts to change your relationship with money. And it's not because you suddenly became less capable or less responsible, but because your brain became overloaded. Decision fatigue happens when your brain has carried responsibility for too many decisions without relief. And it's not just the big decisions, it's the small ones too. There is this constant adjustment, this constant awareness, this constant anticipation. Your brain doesn't differentiate between important and routine. It just simply tracks the load that it's carrying. And a sustained load reduces available energy, not intelligence, your available energy. So think of it this way. Have you ever delayed looking at something financial? It's not because you were afraid of what you were going to find, but because you didn't want to engage your brain into yet another decision. That right there is decision fatigue. It's not necessarily avoidance, right? Because you don't avoid looking at your bank statements. You don't avoid making financial decisions. You may delay it, and it's because of the fatigue. Think about when your phone, and this actually just happened the other day. I realized that my phone was moving a little bit slower, and it's because I had too many apps open in the background. Nothing was wrong with my phone, right? This is a brand new phone, but things were slowing down, and my battery, I noticed, was draining faster, and the response time was starting to decrease. Not because the phone lost the capability. My phone could do these things, but it lost available capacity. And your brain works the same way. When there are too many financial decisions, think of them as open loops or open apps in the background. That mental energy that you didn't realize was being used up, it's not because you all of a sudden became incapable, but rather you were overloaded. Does that make sense? And this is why if you new here, I love a good reframe, right? But if you're part of the community, y'all know I love a good reframe because it helps you to shift the way you look at a thing so that you can overcome that thing. And reframing decision fatigue is so important because most women will start to misinterpret fatigue as a lack of discipline. They'll think, oh, I need to be more focused, or I need to try harder, or I need to stop procrastinating, right? And that type of self talk can be so um, detrimental to your progress and to your breakthrough journey because it's not a lack of discipline, right? Because discipline doesn't necessarily restore capacity. Clarity restores capacity. That reduced load restores capacity, right? So when I started to close down my apps, my phone started to move a little bit faster. And then, the battery wasn't draining nearly as fast, right? So you're not delaying decisions because you lack discipline. You're delaying decision because your brain has been carrying a sustained responsibility for way too long. Responsible women don't just make decisions. So think about this. It's not just, oh, I need to just decide, right? No, it's the monitoring, the constant monitoring, even when nothing requires your immediate attention. Your brain stays engaged. You're constantly tracking, constantly maintaining, constantly anticipating, preventing, if you will. And that type of engagement consumes so much energy, even when things are calm, because awareness itself requires energy. You don't just make financial decisions, you carry financial awareness, and it is constant. I talked about this in a previous video where your brain is just constantly on. And this is why you can't function perfectly at work all day because, making complex decisions professionally, solving problems efficiently, and still feel mentally exhausted when it comes to your personal finances. Not because personal finances are harder, but because your personal finances are emotionally tied to your stability. Your brain just can't. It just does not engage or disengage fully. You don't lack discipline. You just haven't had relief from being the one who always has to think about it. That distinction changes how you see yourself and how you respond. Imagine sitting down at a restaurant after a mentally exhausting day. The menu itself isn't complicated. You understand the options, but making the decision feels heavier than usual. Honestly, making this decision of what you want to eat, while that should be something so simple because you're hungry, maybe you haven't even eaten all day, should feel easy. But making the decision feels heavier than usual. Not because, again, the decision is difficult, but because your brain has already had to make so many decisions throughout the day. Make sense? Decision fatigue doesn't remove your ability to choose, it just reduces your desire to engage. And money decisions feel the same way when your brain is overloaded. Decision fatigue doesn't just delay action, it changes how you feel about yourself because you begin questioning your own follow through. You wonder why things feel heavier than they used to, and then you assume that something has changed in you. But nothing has changed in your capability. What has changed is how much your brain has been carrying for too long. And the load changes experience, not capability. This is where most financial advice will fail most women, right? And especially responsible women, because it assumes the issue is behavior. So then it prescribes more structure, more tracking, more discipline. But structure increases load if clarity doesn't reduce decisions. You don't need more effort. You need fewer open loops, fewer decisions that are competing for your attention. This clarity lets your brain finally relax, and reduced friction restores capacity naturally. So, think about how many financial decisions have you been carrying mentally without even realizing how much energy they consume. Not because they're urgent, but because so many of them remain unresolved. And unresolved decisions quietly drain your energy, even when you're not actively thinking about them. And this is why clarity is so powerful. Clarity doesn't just improve your finances, it restores your mental energy. Because when your brain stops negotiating constantly, it stops tracking constantly, it stops maintaining those open loops constantly. And when how much your brain has been holding for too long decreases, relief appears. Not because all of a sudden your situation has changed overnight, but because your brain finally experienced rest. If decision fatigue remains misunderstood, then you'll continue blaming yourself. You'll continue applying pressure and increasing structure unnecessarily. Not because pressure helps, because when you misunderstand the real problem, you end up putting more pressure on yourself instead of creating relief. And the reality is, you don't need self pressure, you need structural clarity. Here is what I want you to understand, because you're not struggling because you lack discipline. You're struggling because you've been mentally carrying financial responsibility without relief for too long. And relief begins with awareness, not more pressure. Awareness is going to be what changes your behavior more naturally, not another spreadsheet, not more structure, not someone that you pay that tells you that what you're doing is just not enough. This awareness is going to help you to stop carrying things that were never meant to stay on your mind forever. So now I want you to ask yourself, honestly, what decisions have you been carrying mentally that you haven't fully resolved? Not because you can't, but because you've been mentally overloaded. This question is going to create clarity. That clarity is going to create relief. That relief is going to restore energy. So you're not avoiding financial decisions because you're weak, irresponsible, lazy, or whatever other negative self talk that you are partnering with. You're avoiding them because your brain has been strong for too long without rest, and rest restores clarity. In the next video of this particular series, we're going to dismantle one of the most damaging labels financially responsible women carry, and that is the belief that they're bad with money. Because when in reality, they've simply been over responsible for too long. And once you see that, everything starts to shift. If this video has helped you to see your money differently, I encourage you to subscribe, like, comment, and share this with someone else that could identify with this, because building habits that lead to real wealth is so powerful. And this video, I hope, has helped you to do this. I want you to remember two things. One, breakthrough starts when you decide to take control. And two, wealth is not built by accident, it built by the decisions that you make today. I'll see you next time.